They forged my signature to sell my house. I found out the day they handed me a pen. The morning my stepfather handed me a pen and asked me to sign my name, I smiled, picked it up, and clicked the top twice. Then I set it down. Actually, I said, I need to read it first. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. That was the moment 7 years of being the quiet one, the good one, the one who never caused a scene finally ended. Not with a fight, not with screaming, with a pen I refused to use. What happened next changed every single thing about my life. But to understand it, you need to go back to the summer I was 11, sitting on a council estate stairwell in Coventry, watching my mum cry over a letter she wouldn't let me read. My name is Saren, Welsh name. My mother picked it. It means star. She used to say that to me when I was small, tucking me in with that soft, tired smile she had. You're my little star, Saren. She said it like she meant it with her whole body. My mum, Carol, worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. Days at a cleaning company, Tuesday and Thursday evenings at a call center. We didn't have much, but she made what we had feel intentional. Charity shop furniture she'd painted herself. Curtains she sewed from fabric she found at a market. A window box of herbs on the kitchen ledge, rosemary, thyme, mint, because she said it made a kitchen smell like someone lived there. We rented. We always rented. But when I was 9, something shifted. Her mother, my Nan Dorothy, died and left her a semi-detached house in Kenilworth. 3 bedrooms, a small garden, a road lined with lime trees. It wasn't large, but it was theirs. Ours. Property Nan had spent 40 years paying off on a teacher's salary. Mum cried when the solicitor called. Not from grief, though that was there too. From relief. We have something solid, she said. We moved in that October. I remember the smell of it, old radiators and something floral. Like dried lavender someone had left in a drawer years ago. That house was the first place I ever felt safe. Then Martin came along. Martin arrived when I was 10 and attached himself to my mother the way ivy attaches to a wall. Slowly, quietly, until you look up one day and realize it's holding the whole structure together and the structure has started to crack. He wasn't violent. I want to be honest about that because people always expect that part. He was something subtler and I think more dangerous. He was strategic. He made my mother laugh. He fixed the boiler when it broke. He called me kiddo and taught me how to play chess and let me win sometimes so I'd keep playing. He had a way of making you feel chosen, like you were special for having his attention. By the time I was 12, he'd moved in. By 13, they were married. By 14, I was watching him explain to my mother why her name alone on the mortgage made things complicated for them as a family. I was 15 when she put his name on the title. I didn't understand what that meant then. I do now. Have you ever watched someone you love make a decision you couldn't stop? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I was a quiet teenager. Studious, some teachers said. Withdrawn, others probably thought. I kept my head down and I noticed things. That's the skill you develop when you grow up in a house where the atmosphere can shift without warning. You become a reader of rooms. What I noticed over the years was this. Martin had a brother named Paul. Paul was loud where Martin was measured. Brash where Martin was considered. Paul sold second-hand cars and had opinions about everything and liked to hold court at the dinner table. He and Martin spoke on the phone every Sunday evening, and once a month Paul came for dinner, where the two of them would drift into the living room afterward and talk in the low, close way that stops when you walk past the door. I noticed that when Paul visited, Mum always seemed smaller afterward. Quieter, like something had been rearranged inside her. I noticed that Martin started referring to the house as our investment when he spoke to his friends. I noticed that when Nan's old writing desk was sold, Mum said it was taking up space. Martin was the one who arranged the sale and mentioned it only afterward. Small things. Individually nothing. Collectively a pattern. When I was 17, I came home from sixth form to find a man I didn't recognize in our living room with a clipboard and a tape measure. He introduced himself as being from an estate agency. Valuation, he said, just a routine valuation. Mum was in the kitchen making tea, back to the door. Routine valuation of what? I asked. Martin laughed. Just keeping tabs on the market, kiddo, I smiled. I went upstairs. I sat on my bed and wrote the name of the estate agency in my phone's notes app. I left for university in Manchester the following September. Environmental law. I chose it because I cared about it, but also, if I'm honest, because I wanted to understand how systems worked, who owned what rights attached to what, how paper and ink determine the shape of a person's life. I came home for Christmas, Easter, summers. Each time the house felt slightly different, not in the furniture that stayed mostly the same, in the atmosphere, in the way Martin moved through the rooms like a landlord rather than a husband. Mum seemed happy enough, or she seemed practiced at seeming happy. With people you love, it can be hard to tell the difference. The summer I turned 20, I sat at Nan's old kitchen table, the one Mum had kept, the one I'd done homework on since I was 9, and Mum told me she and Martin were thinking about consolidating their assets. "What does that mean?" I asked. Martin leaned back in his chair. "Just sensible financial planning, Saren. The house has appreciated significantly. If we release some equity or downsized, we could invest for our retirement." "Whose retirement?" "Everyone's," Martin said. "Yours too, eventually." I looked at my mother. She was looking at the table. "If something in this is landing close to home, stay with me. The next part matters." I went back to Manchester. I called my mum's old solicitor, the one who'd handled Nan's estate. I remembered her name, Frances Whitmore, from the paperwork I'd seen as a child. Frances no longer practiced, but her former colleague took my call. I explained the situation carefully, without accusation. I asked a simple question: what were my mother's rights regarding the property? The answer came back within a week. My mother and Martin jointly own the house, both names on the title. In a divorce or dispute, it would likely be treated as a marital asset, subject to division. However, and here was the part that changed everything, my mother had received the property as an inheritance from her own mother, which meant that under certain circumstances, particularly if it could be demonstrated that the inheritance predated the marriage and was intended solely for her, there were arguments for ring-fencing it. Arguments, not certainties, arguments. But there was something else. Something the solicitor mentioned almost in passing. "Your grandmother's original will," he said. "Do you know what it said specifically?" I didn't, not precisely. I'd been 9 when Nan died. "It might be worth finding a copy," he said. "Wills are public documents once probated. If Dorothy specified conditions on the bequest, for example, that the property should remain in the maternal line, that changes things." I thanked him. I hung up. I booked a train back to Kenilworth. Nan's house had a loft. Mum had always called it the archive, half joking, because Nan had kept everything: council meeting minutes from the 70s, receipts from appliances she'd owned for decades, letters tied with actual ribbon. Martin didn't know I'd come back that weekend. Mum thought I was there for a visit, which I was, partly. While Mum was at Tesco, I climbed into the loft. It took me 40 minutes. In a cardboard box labeled Dorothy Personal, behind 3 shoeboxes of Christmas cards, I found a manila envelope. Inside, a copy of the original will, and beside it, a letter Nan had written in her careful, looping handwriting to my mother. The will itself was standard except for one clause. The property at number 14, should Carol ever leave it, divorce, or wish to sell, was to pass first to her children or their children, not to a spouse. To blood, the letter was shorter, 4 lines. "Carol, this house is yours and Saren's, not anyone else's. If the time comes that you need protecting from someone who should have protected you, this is your shield. I hope you never need it. I am leaving it anyway." I read it twice. I folded it. I took a photo of both documents on my phone and emailed them to myself, the solicitor, and a second address I set up that weekend. Then I put them back exactly as I'd found them. I was 22 and in my final year of university when Martin made his move. He'd been patient. I'll give him that. 5 years of settling in, of becoming necessary, of making my mother dependent on his income, his planning, his presence. He'd waited until she was comfortable enough not to question. The phone call came on a Tuesday in March. "Saren, it's Mum. We've got some exciting news. We're going to buy a flat in Spain. Martin thinks it's a brilliant investment and we'd release the equity here to fund it. The estate agent is coming Friday. I wondered if you could come this weekend so we can sort out the paperwork together. I said that sounded lovely. I said I'd be there Saturday. I called my solicitor on Wednesday. By Friday, I was on a train to Kenilworth with a folder under my arm and a plan I hadn't told anyone about. This is the part people always ask me about, how I stayed calm. I'll tell you exactly. Here's what I knew by the time I walked through that front door. The original will contain a condition that Martin's solicitor had almost certainly never seen because it had never been disclosed during the title transfer. If it had been correctly registered, and I was about to find out whether it had, then any sale required consent from Dorothy's bloodline. Meaning me. Nan had been a careful woman, a thorough woman, a woman who taught secondary school for 37 years and understood that the world did not always protect people who deserved protecting. She'd had that clause specifically registered with the land registry. Frances Whitmore, the original solicitor, had made sure of it before she retired. I'd confirmed this with a land registry search I'd done at the university library 3 days earlier. Martin didn't know. His solicitor, whoever it was, had missed it or ignored it. Maybe they'd assumed a widow and a teacher hadn't thought to complicate a simple residential title. She had. Martin stood in the kitchen with a folder and an easy smile when I arrived Saturday morning. Mum was at the table with 2 cups of tea. The estate agent had already been. Numbers had been discussed. This meeting apparently was about paperwork. "How's university?" Martin asked. "Nearly done," I said. He slid the folder across the table. "Just some forms so we can proceed with the sale. Your name's on one of them as a formality, given the original inheritance. Standard stuff." I looked at my mum. She was watching her tea. Standard stuff. I picked up the pen. I clicked it twice. I looked at the form and there it was. A transfer of title that, if signed, would clear the registered condition and allow the sale to proceed without further reference to Nan's clause. It wasn't standard. It was the whole thing. That one signature was all he needed. I set the pen down. "I'd like to read it first," I said. Martin laughed. "Of course. Take your time. I read every line slowly, calmly." While Martin refilled the kettle and my mum sat very still, then I looked up. "I can't sign this." Martin turned from the counter. The easy smile stayed, but something behind his eyes went cold. "Saren, it's a formality." "Actually, it's not. There's a registered condition on this title from my grandmother's original will. This form is designed to extinguish it. If I sign, I waive my rights and any future claim on behalf of my mother's bloodline. It's not a formality. It's the whole legal mechanism." The kettle boiled. Martin didn't move to pour it. My mum looked up for the first time. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. I won't give you every word because some of it was ugly and some of it still belongs to my mother, not to me. What I will tell you is this. When I put my solicitor's letter on the table, the one I'd asked her to draft Wednesday night, summarizing the registered condition, citing the exact title number, and confirming that any sale required my written, witnessed consent, Martin's face did something I had never seen it do in 12 years. It went blank, not angry, not surprised. Blank the way a screen goes when the signal drops. "Paul," Martin said eventually. I was told Paul's solicitor had handled the title search. Paul, it turned out, had either missed the condition or chosen not to mention it. I'll leave you to work out which. Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone was counting on you not knowing something? Drop it in the comments. You are not alone in this. My mother asked Martin to leave the house that evening. Not permanently, not yet. She needed time, which I gave her without pushing. Martin spent 3 months trying to negotiate, to reframe what had happened, to suggest that it was all a misunderstanding and that with goodwill on both sides they could move forward. She was polite. She listened. And then one morning in October, she called me, and her voice was different, steadier, lower, like something had settled in her, and she said, "I've made an appointment with a family solicitor." Good, I said. She paused. "How did you know I'd get here?" "I didn't," I said honestly. "But Nan did." Over the following weeks, the whole picture came together piece by piece, the way it always does when something hidden is brought into light. Martin's intention had been to release the equity, approximately £280,000 at current valuation, use it to purchase a property in Spain solely in his name, and over time shift the financial center of gravity away from the Kenilworth house entirely. Once the equity was released and the Spanish flat purchased, negotiating the sale of the UK property and splitting the proceeds would have been straightforward. It wasn't illegal precisely. It was what people in the legal profession call sharp practice. He'd been careful to stay just inside the line. The forged element, the part that crossed into something more serious, was the form he'd presented to me. His solicitor later claimed it had been a template error. The condition had been summarized incorrectly, and the consent clause had been formatted as if it were a standard spousal waiver, not a registered restriction. My solicitor described this as either gross negligence or deliberate misrepresentation. A complaint was filed with the Solicitor's Regulation Authority. I won't tell you how that ended because it's ongoing. What I can tell you is that the estate agent withdrew. The Spanish flat fell through, and the land registry entry for 14 Lime Tree Road, Kenilworth, still carries Dorothy Margaret Poole's protective clause, intact, exactly as she intended. My mother filed for divorce 8 months later. It wasn't immediate. She needed time, which I gave her without pushing. Martin spent 3 months trying to negotiate, to reframe what had happened, to suggest that it was all a misunderstanding and that with goodwill on both sides they could move forward. She was polite. She listened. And then one morning in October she called me, and her voice was different, steadier, lower, like something had settled in her, and she said, "I've made an appointment with a family solicitor." Good, I said. She paused. "How did you know I'd get here?" "I didn't," I said honestly. "But Nan did." If this story hit somewhere close, the waiting, the watching, the staying calm long enough to act, I want you to share it with someone who needs it. You know who they are. I graduated in June, first class, environmental law. My mum came to the ceremony. She wore a yellow coat she'd bought secondhand and had altered herself because she still did things like that. She cried when I walked across the stage. Proper tears, not the quiet ones. Afterward, we went back to Kenilworth. We sat in the garden, Nan's garden, Mum's garden, my garden, in whatever way it was, and we had Prosecco from supermarket glasses, and the sun stayed out longer than it had any right to in an English June. Mum said, "What are you going to do now?" I looked at the lime trees along the road. "I think I want to do this," I said. "For other people, help them understand what they own, what they're entitled to, what the small print actually says." She nodded. She looked at the house. "Your Nan would have liked that." "I think so too," I said. "Here's what I want you to take from this. My grandmother never met the man her daughter would eventually marry. She never knew Martin's name or Paul's name or the number of the estate agency that came to measure the rooms she'd spent 40 years in. But she sat down with a solicitor and she said, 'Make sure this stays with the people who should have it.' She planned for a future she couldn't see, for a threat she couldn't name, for a granddaughter who was 4 years old and didn't yet know she'd need protecting. That's the kind of love that doesn't make noise. It just works quietly when it's needed. I was the one who climbed into the loft. I was the one who read the will and sent the emails and sat across the kitchen table and set the pen down. But I was standing on something she built. And I want to ask you something before you go. Is there someone in your life who laid groundwork for you quietly without making a thing of it, and you only understood it later? A parent, a grandparent, a mentor who left you something that wasn't money but felt like more? Tell me in the comments. And if you've made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Her breaking point is where we tell the stories women aren't supposed to talk about, the inheritance disputes, the quiet manipulation, the moments we finally stopped being polite and started being precise. New stories every week. If this one stayed with you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone sitting quietly in a situation like this, watching, waiting, trying to figure out if they're allowed to act, send them this video. They're allowed. Peace doesn't come from the fight. It comes from knowing what's yours and being ready. See you next week.